Yeah. So, hope everyone is ready to get ignited. We have a whole amazing lineup of things this coming weekend. Hopefully some of you have signed up for our workshops coming tomorrow. And as much as we want to be looking at radical ideas that can change the world, that can bring about a better world for all of us, for the whole world, we also want to start from a position of also recognizing that ideas are not only cerebral, we can feel, we can actually be in a moment of reflection. I think the world needs a moment of reflection at this particular time. We have been very lucky to have an artist who embodies a lot of the principles, a lot of the values that we hold as the Transnational Institute, and they're going to be kicking us off today. Shishani is a musical artist born in Namibia, based in Amsterdam. There they are. Multi-award winning, touring internationally, and their music speaks to a social consciousness, speaks to a radical idea of what the world might look like. I will give them a chance to explain to you what their music is all about. My job right now is to just open up the space and say, as much as we want to be in ideas, let us have a moment of feeling, and then let's have a moment of coming together and bringing about solutions so we can build a better world for everyone. Thank you very much. Shishani.
Thank you, Sean, for the wonderful introduction, and good evening, everybody. Goedenavond. I would like to first greet and get this energy going in the space in Oshiwambo, my mother's language. And it's quite simple. I'll ask you questions, and you answer, Mwatoke el wapo? Onawa? Onawanga? Yalo. Have you spent the evening? Yes. Have you spent it well? Yes. Have you spent it really well? And normally now the greeting starts that you ask me the same questions and we start talking about how the weather is, how the children are, how everything is going. And what I really loved about this, this exchange is that people actually take time to greet each other. Now, if you're in a hurry, it's not a wonderful thing because it can take literally 10 minutes just saying hello. But it's also one of the most beautiful things that I've always taken from my mother's culture. And growing up, being African and being European, being both in a world that wants you to choose or puts you in a category, I was very aware from a young age which voices are actually taken serious and which are not, which lives are valued and which are not. And I wrote this song during an important moment in the Netherlands. It's the 4th and the 5th of May, where we commemorate the Second World War and the atrocities that happened. And during these speeches from, officials, we always say, this never again, dit nooit meer. And here we are, in the middle of a polycrisis with the most horrible things happening, to which Europe is contributing strongly. So, as much as we say, let's remember the people that have fallen, let's not forget to remember a lot of other people that are still struggling. This one is called Forget to Remember. Freedom for a few, maybe if they look like you. Whoa, 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 whoa. Freedom for a few, maybe if they look like you. Whoa, 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 whoa. I said, how long will we keep on forgetting? Kopty, RMS, black and brown lives matter in the US. Gaza and Syria, still slavery in Libya. The Kurds, the Uyghurs in China, Myanmar and Nepal. What about Bosnia? What about Afghanistan? Freedom for a few, maybe if they look like you. Whoa, 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 whoa. Freedom for a few, away Sudan. It's like the whole world forgets Africans. Apartheid in our governments. Indigenous people not relevant. What about the sound, the Aboriginals headed on my First Nations, Amazonians, Polynesians, Indonesia, free West Papua, free Palestine. I said, how long will we keep on forgetting? I said, how long will we keep on forgetting? There's a war on women every day. 140 women slain daily by their partners and family, 'cause they're still seen as property. And my queer and trans community, it's a war zone chronically. You see, Yemen is still hungry, kids still in the streets over there in Greece. I said, how long will we keep on forgetting? And we forget to remember it's all of us. We forget to remember it's all of us. We forget to remember. I said, how long will we keep on forgetting? And a part of the remembering as a migrant child growing up far away from my mom's culture has been trying to return to the language that I wasn't raised with, because I had to learn 6 European languages because that was the future, being able to speak French and German and Dutch and English, and even dead languages like Latin and Greek was more important than knowing Oshiwambo. So in my teens and early 20s, it was really important for me to go back and try to learn the language or engage with the language, because there's so much knowledge kept in this language, and with those parts of yourself not being connected with those parts of yourself and those parts of culture and knowledge, I recognized how much I was missing in the words, in the meanings, in the philosophy, in the way we view the world. Some words we cannot translate. So in this journey, I went looking for my grandmother because she passed quite young. I didn't get a chance to get to know her. And I heard that she was an important figure in the village, because when there is anything important, we sing. When somebody gets born, passes on, if there's a marriage, you name it, we sing. But there's always one person that starts the song, and that was her. And in Oshiwambo you say, Meme Cuckoo. Cuckoo for your grandmother. So this one is called Cuckoo. And I can have quite some reverb for this one. My grandma was a singer in a village. She sang for the people every day. Every day. She lived in Oshirambo, Ovambo land, made her way through the savannah sand. The savannah sand. And kujulukwa anokwalindi nethimo kukupula kucha ondazapeni nongayije ondazapeni nongayije kukuwanje onde kujulukwa anokwalindi nethimo kukupula kucha ondazapeni nongayije ondazapeni nongayije. Thank you. Are we still together? Are we still together? Yes. Thank you. Now, this song is very dear to me, and it's a song that I also just released today. And basically, it's a song of grief, because as we're sitting here now and gathering, there is so much happening, and I don't think we get the tools to process and all these emotions, just having to turn off the phone, not wanting to see these images. How do we relate to so much horror, so much sorrow? And I wrote this song as a way to soothe, you know, as a song for grief of those that have already transitioned and are looking back and hopefully are able to say, I'm peaceful now. Looking down, I bet you're wondering why I'm not around. Don't worry, I'm peaceful now. Doom, I know it's heavy, but I'm peaceful now. Wish I could take away all this pain, just let go of it and be free once again. Doom, I know it's heavy, but I'm peaceful now. I know it's heavy. Ooh, ooh, it's heavy, but I'm peaceful now. I know it's heavy, but I'm peaceful now. And then looking at younger generations, the next generation, this song is inspired by them. I was going through a rough time, and I went to the park to deal with myself, to feel sorry for myself, to be in nature where I can relax. And there was this little girl who was learning how to walk. And how that goes is, you know, they stand up and then they fall, and then they stand up and they laugh and they fall, and they stand up and they fall and they laugh even harder, and then they stand up again and they fall. And this kept on going for 45 minutes. And I just watched this little girl learning how to walk and just being completely fine falling and then getting back up. And the older we get, the harder it seems to actually get back up. So I wrote this as a reminder, you know, that one day, whatever happens, you will be standing again. You win, you lose. Oh, yeah. You break, you fall on down, 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 down. But you walk and you find a way. You make some more mistakes. Then you stand up again. You stand up, oh yeah. You stand up again. Oh, even when it feels like you're tumbling down, you don't know where you're landing. Just remember one day you'll be strong enough and you'll be standing again. Even when it feels like you're tumbling down, you don't know where you're landing. Just remember one day you'll be strong enough and you'll be standing again. Brace yourself, get ready to fall. Without the risk, you got nothing at all. When it's your turn, you better bounce the ball. Always a chance that it hits the wall. No one is gonna be waiting for you, so you better get ready to make the move. Never really sure whether you win or lose, so you might as well choose. And if it goes wrong, turns out that things ain't really as you had them planned. Lost the ground beneath your feet, the fall seems endlessly deep. Keep your eyes open wide and let your heart be your guide. Be your guide, yeah. Even when it feels like you're tumbling down, you don't know where you're landing. Just remember one day you'll be strong enough and you'll be standing again. Even when it feels like you're tumbling down, you don't know where you're landing. Just remember one day you'll be strong enough and you'll be standing again. You'll be standing again. Thank you so much. And I will gladly join you again later.
Ladies and gentlemen, Shishani. You can find their music on shishani.nl, but they're going to be back again to close off this evening's program. I hand over to Laura. Oh, first, your eyes on the screens, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
I don't want to take your time with introducing the Transnational Institute in Amsterdam. As the months pass, and hopefully as the years pass, I hope that our work itself would introduce the Institute to you. We have come to Amsterdam with some hopes, many aspirations, and very few plans. Very few plans because we feel that we should ultimately be guided by the needs of the people in Europe, in the third world particularly, and in the United States. We are an academic, educational institution, but we are also hopefully a progressive, committed one, committed to social justice, to freedom, to equality, and to the construction of new societies, socialist societies across the world.
My name is Fiona Dove, and I'm the director of the Transnational Institute. Oh, yeah, I was hoping I had one of those fancy ones I see others with, but apparently not. So, shall I start again? Welcome to Ignite. It's wonderful to see such a full house here at Polycrisis in Amsterdam tonight. And I think we have quite a lot of people online. I'm looking to see where they would be. But we do have people online watching us. The last I heard was around 300 people are also joining us virtually tonight. Shishani, I wanted to thank you so much. That was really beautiful, and we come from the same region. Well, half of you do, and half of me, I think, or most of me. But thank you, it was beautiful. So tonight we've got a great lineup of thought leaders who are hopefully going to help us make sense of the really dark times that we find ourselves in, and also ignite our imaginations about what we can do. But first, as you gathered from that very nice little video, T and I is, we turned 50 years old this year. So I thought that, yeah. So I know there's a lot of friends in the room and online, so we wanted to celebrate that half-century milestone with you. And I thought I would start by telling you a little bit about the origin story, if you like, of TNI, because you don't all know it, I think. So it begins in October 1972 at a cafe in Paris called La Croisserie des Lilas, which was apparently it still is actually, quite a famous lefty haunt in Paris, which reportedly was visited by the likes of Hemingway and Lenin. So Susan George, who I think a lot of you will know, an American intellectual living in Paris at the time, was asked to organize a dinner at that restaurant to consult about the foundation of the Transnational Institute. And we took a look in the archives at who was on the invitee list, and it was people like Simone de Beauvoir, Jean-Paul Sartre, Michel Foucault, so luminaries for the French left of the time. So Susan had been asked to do this by two guys, Marcus Raskin and Richard Barnett. And Mark and Dick, as they're known, they were the founders of the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. in 1963. Both of them had worked for the Kennedy administration and were appalled at the Bay of Pigs incident that nearly set off a nuclear war. They were opposed to the Vietnam War, and they were very close to the civil rights movement of that time. And they decided that Washington needed a lefty think tank to speak truth to power. Nearly 10 years later, they thought that Europe would be a good base for an international institute of the same order. So they found a philanthropist, a man called Samuel Rubin, and asked him whether he would be prepared to fund such an institute. And Sam was a man who believed in the value of investing in big ideas. He said, global problems require global solutions, and those solutions will come from investing in smart people to solve them, more or less, but to invest in ideas. And he gave a remarkable amount of money. I calculated what it would be worth in today's terms, and it was something like $3 million a year. And that foundation gave us money for 30 years. They gave us 1/3 of everything they had. Where are the Sams today? Meanwhile, IPS also asked Iqbal Ahmed. Now, Iqbal, you heard at the beginning there. Iqbal was a charismatic Pakistani intellectual who worked at IPS, and he lived in Paris, and he'd met Fanon, actually, in Paris, and had got active in the Algerian liberation movement. So he knew the European scene a bit, and he had contacts here. So they asked him, would you go around and consult left intellectuals across Europe about the establishment of an institute that would speak truth to power, an international institute? So Iqbal came and he spoke to some 200 people, all of whom enthusiastically embraced the idea, of course. And soon after, Iqbal was appointed director, and on the 21st of March, 1974, which is quite an auspicious day as well, he officially registered the Transnational Institute with the Amsterdam Chamber of Commerce, and thus TNI was born. Distinct from the rarefied atmosphere of academia at the time, TNI became this bustling hub of encounters between scholars and activists who were deeply engaged with the emancipatory movements of those times. It's good to remember that those were very dark times, much like we have today. You had the politics of the world being shaped by the Cold War. You had interventions, military interventions, particularly by the United States, taking place all over what was then called the Third World. And you had an oil crisis sparked by Israel that was rocking the global economy. You also had the coup in Chile the year before, 1973. There was a coup in Chile. The Vietnam War was dragging on. Spain was still in the grip of fascism. The Greek and Portuguese dictatorships had just fallen in 1974. And much of Southern Africa was still under colonial rule. So while the context has changed over time, and you can see it from all the pictures and from the video, For 5 decades, TNI has consistently supported significant struggles for democracy and against colonialism, dictatorship, and apartheid, from Chile in the 1970s through to Myanmar and Palestine today. We've stood for peace and against nuclear weapons and militarism, again from the threats at the height of the Cold War to the state of permanent war that we now find ourselves in. And we've stood for socialism and against neoliberal ideology. We've taken on the international financial institutions that use debt to get countries to impose austerity on their peoples and to privatize everything. And right now we're working on various proposals that could constitute elements that could help contribute to a new international economic order. At the core, TNI has always been about connecting the dots between democracy, justice, peace, sustainability. We fostered collaboration, north and south, between grassroots activists, scholars, and policymakers. And we've always pushed for real alternatives to entrenched power. When Iqbal said that he hoped we would be remembered for what we do, I think he was being a little understated. I think a half century on, Iqbal would be really proud of the extent to which the Transnational Institute has remained true to the aspirations he laid out back in 1974 in Amsterdam when he introduced the Institute, and that we have carried forward his legacy in ways that I don't think Iqbal could have dreamed of. We meet here tonight amidst a genocide taking place in Palestine. The Russian war in Ukraine grinds on, and the NATO is expanding, and the military budgets that we are seeing, the military spending spree that we are seeing, we haven't seen anything like it in recent history. These same governments that can spend so much money on guns and on genocide say there's no money to assist refugees, that there's no money for affordable public services, that there's no money to address climate change. In an era when international solidarity and global cooperation are more critical than ever, we're finding ourselves locked in perpetual war and competition as a zero-sum game. But a spark has been ignited, and Palestine has helped ignite that. Everywhere, people have taken to the streets, occupied institutions, and refused to be silenced. And they're joining the dots. They're finding common cause. All the movements that are standing in solidarity with Palestine are all these movements, all of us. I think history teaches us that under circumstances of great challenge, often the seeds of radical transformation are born. And I think we are seeing that now. Knowledge, analyses, ideas are really important for those seeds to be able to germinate and to flower. And this, I think, is where TNI comes in. As we honor TNI's legacy and look forward to the next 50 years, let us remember that Sam Rubin was right. Ideas do matter, and they can change the world. Thank you. Thank you. It's my pleasure now to hand the mic to Laura Flanders, the fabulous Laura Flanders. And just to introduce her quickly. So Laura's a fellow of TNI, and she's going to be our moderator for tonight. She's British, but she's been living in the United States a really long time, I think. She's an award-winning journalist, and for quite a while she has had her own nationally syndicated TV and radio program in the United States called The Laura Flanders Show. Look out for it. And The Laura Flanders Show, very appropriately for this occasion, reports on real-life models of shifting power in the United States and in the world. Laura, all yours.
Yay, Fiona. Woohoo! Well, thank you so much, Fiona. Yes, ideas matter. And yeah, I host a show on public television, and we took it upon ourselves early on to come up with the tagline where we say the Laura Flanders show, which is now called Flanders and Friends, Laura Flanders and Friends, to try to imagine that I might have some friends by now. We say it's the place where the people who say it can't be done take a back seat to the people who are doing it. And I often wonder about that. And this year and these last 12 months have been hard at times. And not just the last 12 months, but there are many days where I think maybe we were just wrong. Maybe the place where the people who say it can't be done were right, would be better. But I think of what you just said, Shishani, where you say we are both. We are divided. And I think if we really plumbed any of our feelings right now, we would be feeling both, right? Both excited that TNI has been working for 50 years for peace, justice, humanization, and the end of militarism and war, and discouraged that TNI has been working for 50 years for the end of peace, justice, and socialism. And I think that's exactly where I come to you today with that both, because I just left New York City, which had a very both kind of a day. I don't know how many of you watch the news. But the UN General Assembly is happening. It's terrible for traffic, and it's terrible for lots of other things. And today was the day that Benjamin Netanyahu was speaking at the General Assembly. This same United Nations that has passed 4 resolutions for ceasefire that he has totally ignored, and that has been at a loss to do anything to stop the kind of dehumanization that has taught us just how far we have come in tolerating, as a world, dehumanization in Gaza, in Congo, in Sudan, Ukraine. Just how many of our global safeguards that organizations like CNI have been working for 50 years don't work. And how many of our structures are kind of in tatters. So I feel a little bit sometimes like the recruiter for the Communist Party in the 1950s who said, our people are being shot in the streets of Chile, our people are being chased from Aberdeen to Adelaide, they're locked up in South Africa, they're shot in China, join us. It sometimes feels that way. But the other thing that happened today was as Netanyahu got up to speak, I don't know how many of you saw the great walkout. There was an enormous walkout of scores of people there at the General Assembly. Delegates from countries from across the world just stormed out as he was talking. And outside, there were thousands of people protesting. And there were 25 people at least arrested yesterday and more today, and it's never enough, and it didn't stop enough traffic, but it did indicate that there is the movement that Fiona was talking about that has put Zionism, has put colonialism, has put Palestine back onto our consciousness, and in an interconnected, intersectional way, in a way that we didn't see before, where people are talking about capitalism at the root. And yes, capitalism has changed since we started TNI 50 years ago. Capitalism looks different. Colonialism is at the root. Colonialism looks different. So we need the ideas, the thinking, the igniting of radical thought that we're going to be engaging in here all weekend. But I do believe that we are also seeing the possible growth of a multi-sectoral, multi-racial, multi-issue movement with the capacity to think intersectionally and to have political clout. And maybe 50 years from now, we will be celebrating the end of capitalism, colonialism, patriarchy, white supremacy. So in order for us to get there, we need to consult with some big thinkers, and we need to participate in a conversation. So this event is going to be part big thinkers, part conversation, and I hope that you'll all be with us throughout. I want to remind everyone that we have an online audience. Thank you, everybody. So acronyms, be sure to spell them out so people can understand what we're talking about. Our purpose is to look back, but also to look forward and to ignite. And I want to acknowledge that unfortunately a couple of our panelists are going to be joining us virtually. But I want to introduce our guests in the order that I have here, and as I introduce you, maybe you could step up. So Abir Kopty is with us. Abir is a Palestinian journalist and writer based in Berlin. She has worked as a communications officer and spokesperson for various Palestinian human rights organizations in Haifa and Ramallah. Her political analysis and reporting has appeared in many places, including Middle East Eye, Mondo Weiss, and The Nation. Thank you so much, Abir, for being here. Also with us, Jason Hickel. Where are you, Jason? I'm sorry for stealing your taxi earlier. Jason is an economic anthropologist, author, and professor at the Institute for Environmental Science and Technology at the Autonomous University of Barcelona. His most recent books include The Divide, A Brief Guide to Global Inequality and Its Solutions, and also Less is More, How Degrowth Will Save the World. Jason, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Laura.
Jayati Ghosh is joining us online. I'm thinking we might see Jayati magically. Hi, Jayati. Jayati has written all the books that are behind her. No, she's professor of economics at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning, School of Social Sciences at Nehru University in New Delhi, but she's actually joining us from New York. And she too is an author of, among other things, The Making of a Catastrophe, the disastrous economic fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic in India. Jayati, thanks so much for being with us. Aderonke Ige is with us. Aderonke, welcome. Thanks for joining us. We're finding Aderonke in London. We so wish she was here. She's a humanitarian lawyer, development practitioner, and activist, usually based in Nigeria, has been a human rights advocate and social impact crusader in the nonprofit world for the last decade and a half. She right now is the associate director at Kappa, about which I want her to tell us more. And she's pursuing a postgraduate degree in development studies at SOAS. Finally, Jerome Roos, come on up. Jerome is a fellow in international political economy at the London School of Economics and is working on a forthcoming book, Crisis, The Origins of Our Times. Now, there's a title for you. He's also the author of Why Not Default? The Political Economy of Sovereign Debt. So let's start with you, Jerome. Somebody talked about polycrisis. Is that a good way of looking at what we're going through right now? Is that why we feel so like this? There's multi-crises happening all at once?
Yeah, I mean, what's going on is that, well, first of all, let me say that I'm very happy to be here, actually, and I'm very glad that you're all here, and I'm very glad that TNI is here. So thank you so much for inviting all of us, and I'm really glad to be here. Congratulations on the 50th anniversary for everyone who's involved in TNI, has been involved in TNI. I'm very glad it's around. So our moment, yeah, it's come up. I mean, we all feel it, I think, that it's a dark moment, it's a confusing moment, and I think what happens is that in those moments, you try to make sense of the times in which you're living, and sometimes you need new ideas to try to figure out what it is that, we're experiencing. And I think one frame that has come up in the last couple of years is that of polycrisis, and it's been popularized by an economic historian, Adam Tooze. He didn't come up with the term, but he has a very influential newsletter that a lot of people read, and he has a column in the Financial Times. Basically, the argument that he makes is, okay, there's not just one crisis in the world, there's a bunch of crises, and these amplify each other. And what they do is they create an overarching polycrisis that is larger than the sum of the parts. And I think that's, in a way, it's helpful because it forces us to look at different complex interactions between different parts of the world and how they relate to each other and how they amplify each other. But I prefer to use a slightly different term. And that's because I think that there's a problem, not necessarily in the term polycrisis, but in the way that we use the word crisis itself. And that's because I think what's happened in the 20th century is that the way that we've thought about crisis has changed quite significantly. And if you go back to the origins of the term, which I think is quite interesting, in ancient Greece, you find that, for instance, in a moment of disease, a crisis was the turning point at which the patient either dies or lives. It's actually a decisive moment. It's a moment at which the future can split in two radically opposite directions. And so speaking to what you said earlier in terms of this confusing time in which things are possible and things seem at the same time extremely negative and pessimistic, I think is encapsulated within the origins of the word crisis. And I worry a little bit that if we talk about polycrisis, we just turn it into something that talks about challenges in different parts of the world that we have to somehow manage and find a way to control. And I prefer to think of a crisis as a moment in time. and a moment in time in which two radically or multiple radically different possibilities for the future are all present in that moment. And we've lived through those moments before, sometimes on a global scale. And so I'm personally interested in figuring out, what creates those moments. But what I think we always have to ask ourselves is this question: okay, if crisis is a moment in a progression of a disease at which the patient can live or die, who or what is the patient, and what is the disease? And if we treat this crisis as multiple crises happening all over the place that are confusing us because they're just so disparate, we might be missing the elephant in the room. And I think the elephant in the room is very clearly that there is a modern world system that has emerged over the course of the last 500 years, that's been built through the development of colonialism, capitalism, patriarchy, and all kinds of sort of systems of oppression, exploitation, that have reached the point where they are truly and truly reaching that decisive moment, at which either the system has to change, or the system will produce such catastrophic changes that it will not only undermine the opportunities of itself to survive, but also of countless species on our planet, and eventually of the type of modern civilization that was built up over the course of those 500 years. So I think that's what a crisis ultimately is. It's a decisive moment at which you can split in two radically opposite directions. And it's the system that's in crisis. And that's, I think, where I would start.
Good start. All right. Abir, coming to you, clearly the genocide in Gaza, and now the mounting casualties in Lebanon, and the ongoing land theft in the occupied West Bank has roots long before October 7th of a year ago. And much of what we're seeing there was named even by the United Nations as many as 50 years ago. As they were finding TNI, so too the UN was saying there's a type of racism in Zionism. So a lot of this isn't new, but are there new aspects to what's happening? Is there new learning? Is there something emerging from what you're seeing that is worth noting as new?
Okay, thank you, Laura, and thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you for the TNI for inviting me. I have to start in saying it's such a nice feeling to be in a room where I do not have to explain the basic stuff. So, I mean, we are in a very, a defining moment of our times. And as you mentioned, what's happening in Lebanon, the aggression that started in Lebanon, it is happening because for 12 months, Israel was doing whatever it wants, and no one could stop it. So what's the conclusion is that Israel can do whatever it wants until it's stopped. And it needs to be stopped. And we cannot count on the regimes to stop it. But at the same time, I want also to say how this moment revealed that probably I'm going to state the obvious, that there are a few governments, a group of people who are controlling a very small number of countries, we can count them with one hand, who are willing to support their colonial project at any cost. And for me, I think this is the most important revelation here, at any cost. At one time, I thought that if they realize that it's not a profitable, that the cost of supporting Israel is more than the loss of supporting Israel, maybe something will change in the mindset. But apparently, no. Apparently, they are willing to pay the cost, and it's really costing to protect their colonial project. And I think this is where we need also to invest a lot of thinking. Why? And the cost is not just in lives. It is really tragic that the cost is really high in lives, but apparently some lives are less worthy, and we know that, and we talked about it a lot. But the cost is also the arms of oppression and is extending into Europe. It's extending into those Western countries. It is not just the oppression, it's the willing of twisting every law, every rule to support Israel It's the unleashing of the racism and anti-immigrant, anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab, anti-African discourse, which is unleashing. It's the willing to crush your freedom of speech in order to protect Israel. It's the will to give up all the, values people have been lecturing to the world about. It is also the will to expose completely and remove the facade of values and human rights and democracy and freedom of speech. Those regimes are willing to remove this facade and be exposed in full daylight in order to protect a colonial project that is called Israel. So I think there is a need to discuss these things because, and I think this is one of the important things that also we need to make the connections with, because I think people here need to understand that there is a price of supporting genocide, of supporting aggression, of continuous supporting. And it's not going to stop in Palestine or the Middle East or in Africa. And we're talking here about just a few countries versus the rest of the world. And the feeling that there is so much power is here, but we have to understand that it's the rest of the world. And when sometimes we're so angry and we say the world is dark, the world is bad, the world is like this and that. I say it all the time. Actually, it's not the world. The world is fine. There are millions and millions of people. There are numerous hundreds, thousands of movements and institutions who are saying no. And this is the world. This is the world we want to build together. The few powers that are supporting the colonial project at any cost are not the world. Thank you.
I want to go to Jayati now, if we can. Jayati, being a professor of economics, I'd love to come with you to ask you if you could put what we're seeing right now in the context of the global economy and our economic structures that you've studied so closely.
Sorry, let me begin by just saying how deeply privileged I feel to be part of this celebration. Like Jerome, I've been a beneficiary of the very existence of TNI for so long, in fact, for probably all of its 50 years. And so it's a huge, huge privilege to be here with you today, to be able to celebrate this. And as you said, to recognize just the complexity of it all and how we have to be happy and sad at the same time. I also really appreciated Shishani's songs, especially the last one, where, yes, we have to remember that falling down is just part of it and that we keep getting up and eventually we will learn to walk. I want to pick up from where Abdi, didn't really end, but I think the point she brought up is so essential, that the genocide doesn't stay in one place. It doesn't sort of get dealt with and that's true in economic terms as well. It's not just true in the physical violence, the terrible, terrible stuff that we are seeing today in Palestine and Lebanon. But we have to recognize this is part of a settler colonial pattern. In fact, I think what's extraordinary about Palestine is that it's been, if you like, in real times in our lives, that we have seen what is otherwise a replay of a 200-year-long history of colonial expansion and genocide in the Americas. And so what you're seeing is really a compressed version of that today. And it has all the brutality that was spread out over a longer period, but all the extermination brutality and really othering of people that was the basis of the kind of global capitalism that we see today. So in a way, it's not a surprise that this is where we have ended up, because this is really the way in which a lot of it really started. Certainly the globalization process itself started with quite a lot of systematic genocide and settler colonialism and all of that. There's a big change. You mentioned, I think both of you mentioned, Fiona and Laura, that the world has changed. That, you know, it's not the same kind of capitalism that we saw when TNI was started. But it does, in a way, continue on that essentially extractivist model. And I'm sure Jason will have a lot more to say about that, so I won't dwell on that. But a lot of the kinds of extreme reaction we're seeing in many Western capitals are also because of a strong reaction to a pushback against that extractivist model. And so just as the independent countries of the 1950s created a kind of, you know, concern and a tendency to push back then, we are seeing a much stronger pushback today in terms of the pushback against those who are recognizing that this is really no longer a viable model. But the big change that I see, especially in the last few years, is that we moved from what you could call, or what people like to call, a rules-based international order, in which really it was international legal and regulatory systems that were used to perpetuate a lot of this, what you could call colonial extraction, but inequality in different ways. This happened through trade rules, through the WTO and all the associated agreements, and many other economic partnership agreements. It happened through the rules set around the international financial institutions, the IMF and the World Bank. It occurred in various ways, but it was really a legal structure that was the primary vehicle through which a lot of this exploitation and inequality was perpetuated. We're really getting a blowing up of that. And the Polycrisis is partly a symptom of that and partly an origin of that, which is to say the rules-based international trade order doesn't exist anymore. It's been blown up. And it was blown up certainly by Trump, but, you know, it's continued by Biden and continued now in Europe, that none of the rules hold. We've seen the rules-based international legal order in terms of justice, etc., also blown up. So the International Court of Justice can say what it likes about what is happening, what Israel is doing, but it's not going to lead to any implications, ramifications for the country. All of the rules are no longer valid. The only rules that still remain and are pushed to the very end are the rules for finance. So rules for trade, rules for other kinds of, you know, democracy, justice, etc. No, none of them really matters. The rules for finance still matter. And I think it is possible to argue that those rules for finance also are not exactly going to be blown up, because right now global capitalism needs it more than ever before, but are going to disintegrate because they also are increasingly unable to cope with the multiple and cascading crises that we're seeing. So it's a very peculiar moment in the global economy. It's one where you don't really have a clear leader in the old sense of somebody who would ensure stability possibly at the cost of many other countries, but nonetheless would ensure global financial and economic stability, and one that would prevent the system from blowing itself up. We don't have that. Of course, there are many options. I am one of those people who would like to believe that humanity steps back from the brink. So let's assume that that worst option doesn't happen. In these periods of complete flux and what seems like chaos, and as you've all been saying, in these very dark times, these dark times are when niches open up for alternative possibilities. And this we've seen historically. It's been periods like the global depression was one of those periods, the crises of the 70s. These are periods of cracks in the global division of labor, in the global systems of domination and control that enable both new ideas and new possibilities and new power equations to emerge. So I think it's, the Chinese curse is that we live in interesting times. We do. They are also very dark times, but they are also times that open up opportunities in a way that we haven't actually had before. Let me stop here.
Thank you. I'm beginning to hear a theme. Jason, coming to you, how do you connect the dots to the environmental crisis? And it has to be said, at least in my country, that the big green organizations have been shamefully silent over what's been happening in Gaza and the West Bank, which is, among other things, an ecological catastrophe.
It's horrendous, yeah, I agree. Let me begin by saying thank you so much to T&I for organizing this event. Thank you for the incredible music we had earlier. Thank you to Laura for hosting us, for moderating. And let me just express my full solidarity with the struggle for Palestinian liberation, which is really at the core of what all of us are thinking right now. And I think my comrades are correct in pointing out that our current moment has just kind of pulled the mask off, and we see as clearly as ever before, the fact that we live in a colonial world order. It's laid bare before us, and look, I mean that's true in terms of the genocidal violence that's being played out. It's true in terms of the way that capital accumulation works in the world scale, and it's very true also when it comes to the ecological crisis. And I think this really actually it's funny, like I'm always asked to talk about ecology, when really what I want to talk about is capitalist imperialism. And the two are just are a piece of the same problem, right? The ecological crisis is ultimately playing out along colonial lines, right? We know that it is the countries of the imperial core that are overwhelmingly responsible, and specifically their ruling classes, who control the means of production and energy systems and investment, et cetera, are overwhelmingly responsible for the excess emissions that are driving climate breakdown, right? We know that's a fact. We also know it's a fact that the global south suffers the overwhelming majority of the impacts of climate breakdown, right? The people who have contributed literally nothing to the crisis whatsoever, not contributed a small amount, contributed nothing, right? And it's not just, of course, climate breakdown that we face. There's also other dimensions of the ecological crisis. And here, too, we see the same thing playing out. When it comes to excess material use in the world economy, overwhelmingly, it's due to excess material use and accumulation in the imperial core. Half of the material use that's used in the core is net appropriated from the periphery, from the territories of the global south, right? Which causes severe damage. You don't see this damage in Sussex or in Finland. You see it in the Congo. You see it in Indonesia, right? You see it in Bolivia, in the frontiers of extraction. So the core benefits from the resources, and everyone else suffers. So the ecological crisis represents processes of colonization and appropriation, and also is a disaster that's playing out along colonial lines. I think that's really important to spell out. And if we're not attentive to those colonial dimensions, I really think we're fundamentally missing the point, right? We're fundamentally missing the point. The other thing I want to point out here is that we're in this incredible paradox, right, where the world economy, we know, is just massively productive. Like, our productive capacities are incredible. Think of the scale of the labor that humanity has at its disposal, the resources, the technology, the factories, the energy, the materials. Incredible amounts of production to the point of breaking past ecological limits, right? And yet, the vast majority of the human population lives in conditions of massive deprivation. 80% of the population can't meet basic needs, right? So what explains this incredible paradox? It's ultimately our system of production. The social and ecological crisis that we face, which appears unresolvable, is ultimately a symptom of our system of production, capitalism, where our productive capacities, our incredible productive capacities, are organized overwhelmingly around what is most profitable to capital and what can most facilitate accumulation in the core, rather than what is obviously necessary to meet human needs and achieve our ecological objectives. And so we're in this wild place where just like, oh, solving poverty is just going to take generations, right? If we're lucky, we'll get people above $1.90 a day by the end of the century, right? The climate crisis, who can figure out how to solve this? I mean, it seems intractable. None of this is true. It's lies. These are problems that can be very easily solved and very quickly. The problem is that we don't have control over our own productive capacities because we don't have an economic democracy, right? Some of us live in political democracies where from time to time we get to elect officials, government officials. But when it comes to the economic system, right, not even the pretense of democracy is allowed to exist. And that is ultimately the contradiction we face, I think, right? This is a crisis that at its root is about capitalism and can only be resolved by overcoming that fact. And the antidote to capitalism is democracy, is economic democracy, that we should have collective democratic control over what we are producing, what the goals of our production are, who benefits from our production, and so on. And when we do, we can solve these problems quickly, right? We know exactly what to do. The problem is we don't have the power. And so I think that in the face of this crisis, we have to have clarity about what has to be achieved, and we have to start building the movements that are capable of achieving that. And I guess I'll leave it there. But actually, there's something I wanted to say regarding specifically the question of the global South here when it comes to the question of economic democracy. For the South, there's another element I think we have to pay attention to, which is that they need economic sovereignty, right? They need economic liberation at a national level first. Right? Like, of course, the global North is overwhelmingly responsible for the crisis, but the global South, we know, also needs to engage in ecological planning, energy transition, et cetera, et cetera. How does anyone expect them to do that when they do not have sovereign control over their own resources, their own labor, their own lands, their own energy, right? Under the thumb of structural adjustment programs that prevent them from using progressive industrial policy, prevent them from using progressive fiscal policy, prevent them from using progressive monetary policy, basic tools that we know can allow them to achieve developments and ecological transition, they are effectively denied from using. What is the solution to that for the South? Is struggles for economic liberation, right? Now, I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that a struggle for economic liberation in the South is fundamentally antithetical to the capitalist world economy. Because accumulation in the core depends utterly on the cheapening of labor and resources in the global South. It depends utterly on that and has for the past 500 years. And so any attempt by liberation struggles in the periphery to achieve economic independence, to use their own resources for their own development, for their own ecological transition, for their own human needs, is destabilizing for capital in the core. And capital reacts with the most extraordinary violent backlashes. We see it happening all the time. Now it is Palestine, before it was Libya, before it was Iraq, before it was Chile, before it was Indonesia, before it was the Congo. It will never stop. It's over and over and over again. And I think the situation in Palestine right now, we have to understand, is not primarily a moral one. It's that's how we think of it. That is not how capital thinks of it. For them, it is a matter of suppressing and crushing liberation movements, because a liberated Palestine means a liberated Middle East. A liberated Middle East means capitalism in the core really faces a crisis, and they will not let that happen. And they're unleashing the full violence of their extraordinary power to ensure it doesn't. And so I think that's really what we face, right? It's the world system dimension of the violence that we're seeing. And we have to be cognizant of that, and our struggles and our resistance have to be in proportion, I think.
So let's hear from Aderonke on this. Well placed. Aderonke, Iga, how does this conversation so far sound to you, given the work that you do and the people you work with?
Thank you so much, Laura. I want to say hello to everyone in the room. Thank you very much, Shishani, for that beauty. I can't even call it. It's beyond music, and I had goosebumps. So it's a privilege to be part of this conversation. Sadly, I couldn't be there physically, but thankfully, technology to the rescue. Again, one of the few benefits of technology. So to contribute to this, I think Jason actually laid the foundation for me. And when I begin to describe the kind of crisis, or even the way that it has been redefined in the room this evening, I think by Jerome, and the way it plays out in different parts of the world, I'll zero in on the global South, and even more particularly Africa, where I work, where I organize, where we work with the people as well. And I like to describe it as something that, in a cultural way, so I think of it as a masquerade that only changes its clothes. So for people who are familiar with masquerades, you know that a masquerade can come dressed in a green and blue and yellow outfit, and tomorrow it's black and red and cream and all of that. But inside that whole aesthetics and apparel is still the same entity. So that is the way I see all of the powers, capitalism, colonialism, imperialism. So all of the beneficiaries of the crisis that we see, they come together as one entity. And every time we see the manifestations, we see them manifesting in different ways. But the entity itself within that whole gamut is still the same. And that is I think, the challenging part. But at the same time, it is what we need to now zero in on. How do I see this manifest where we work? That's what you asked me, Laura. And I think we don't have to look too far. Just take a glance at the backyard. Look at what is happening in DR Congo. Look at Mali. Look at Burkina Faso. Look at even Nigeria, Mozambique. Look at Sudan. And you realize that everything that has been spotlighted now by the current situations in Palestine, or what we have seen in Ukraine, or we still see, is the fact that people begin to become pawns in the hands of the high and the mighty. And I said that Jerome set the foundation for, Jason set the foundation for me, simply because there's no way you will talk about the manifestation of these interwoven powers and oppressions in Africa, and you will not talk about natural resources. It's at the crux of it, but that is not all there is to it. But then we see the power play, that and the outcome of that power play, or the implication, is that already vulnerable communities are taken advantage of, and they are further weakened, so that then it is hard for people to challenge the powers, or for people to even see clearly how these powers play out. We see it manifest in a way of corporate capture. And that is the reason they all work together. All the powers work together because it comes down to resource control. Who controls the resources? And that's why when Jason was speaking about economic sovereignty, absolutely relatable. Not just economic, even social sovereignty. So because at the end of the day, when you hold down the same resources that people have, either on their land, either by virtue of even being born there, or what accrues to them universally, you realize that you begin to cripple them. And they have mastered these over centuries. And that is what we continue to see, to the extent that the whole of Africa itself contributes very, very minimally to the crisis that is currently going on. But then the continent bears the largest brunt, so it's not only terrible, but I think the hope that I see as an organizer daily is the fact that we keep uncovering. Right now, we are talking about half century for TNI, and we are talking about the mixed feelings of how we have been able to organize power, how we have been able to build people power over the years. But at the same time, we are thinking, if we are 50 and we are still here and we are talking about these struggles, should we then be crying? But for me, the ray of hope I see is the fact that more than ever, attention is now drawn to what the real issues are, to the crux of the matter, to the point where people are less distracted. We know who the enemies are, and we know who the targets are. And the more we synchronize and synergize our struggles, our organizing, be it in terms of academia coming together with civil society and labor movement and researchers, the outcome is going to be explosive. And when I say explosive, on the side of the people and against the powers that have mastered how to make the people pawns, for the sake of profit. I think, so that I don't talk too much, because I believe the conversation will still give birth to additional input. So I think I'll rest it there. But then to say that it's the same problem. It's just different manifestations in different parts of the world, depending on what the interest in that part of the world is at every given moment.
Thank you. Well, we've got about another 15, 20 minutes where we'll address all these issues and how to resolve the crises that face us. And I feel torn between a kind of heart question and a head question. The heart question, it goes back to, I had a conversation not so long ago with Anote Tong, the former president of Kiribati, which is a Micronesian island that 10 years ago was already predicted to be the first country in the world to lose its entire landmass to climate change. And when I saw him this spring, he said, we say it, We say it, we show pictures of us sweeping the sand out of our homes. We show how the tides are rising and how our culture is being flooded and our people being forced to flee, and yet nothing changes. So my question to him was, is it a heart change that we need? Is it a cultural shift? Do we have to somehow embrace or use or deploy our imagination differently? So that's kind of the heart question. Is that the way we get through some of these blocks? But then the head question is, as we think about targets and power you talked about, Jason, I just come from the United States where Netanyahu and Trump have two things, or one thing in common, that they are both facing criminal indictments. These are people whose corruption is there for everybody to see. They are dangerous as they do everything they possibly can to stay out of jail. Is it a death throw of a certain kind of world order, catching up with that kind of blatant corruption that we could see in those two individuals as symbols, perhaps? I know I'm a little fed up with being told we're in the death throes of racism and sexism and homophobia, but they never seem to quite die. But I would like to each of you think about targets. What have we learned about legitimate or useful targets in this moment when it comes to shifting power and change? Do you want to start, Jerome? Like, where do you think, if we're talking about power,
Right.
what have we learned? What do we do?
What do we do? Well, I don't know what we do, but I think the first thing that we should probably do is try to figure out what's the underlying problem, right? And that's always a question of scope. So you can go down to the local level, you can go up to the global level, you can take it in a short term, you can take it in a long term. The problems usually become more intractable the bigger and the longer term you think. But I think that if we take the case of Palestine, which I think is at the heart of a lot of what all of us are thinking about today, I think there what you see is a particular fault line that exposes an entire system of power, its contradictions and its hypocrisies, in a way that is truly explosive. And what I think about that is that it's actually reached the historic point where I don't want to make any predictions, because I think that that's not what a crisis is about. That's precisely the impossibility of making predictions that defines the crisis. But it's a moment, I think, that really cuts to the core of what the post-war order that was built essentially by the United States with the backing of the Western European countries was all about. And that is being fundamentally undermined in its own sort of methodological views of what it is. And what I mean by that is, that entire order was built on a single overarching principle: never again, like Shishani said. And that principle, the Genocide Convention, is what supposedly justified the creation of the State of Israel. And I'm getting a little sick of it as I think about it. But the point here is actually that, fundamentally what we're seeing is that mythology, that hypocrisy is being exposed for what it is. So the first thing that we have to do, collectively, is to point out, what are the fault lines in the system? What are the breaking points in the system, the hypocrisies, and figure out how do we target those?
But haven't we been doing that?
We have been.
Abir, to you, why have we been so weak at being able to stop this? And where do you see possibility?
So there's two parts to this. I think we haven't been able to stop it because obviously we haven't been doing enough. We have to tell ourselves that we haven't been doing enough. I think 12 months of this, and people are going to the streets and boycotting and doing a lot of actions and disrupting. Apparently, it's not enough. So we have also to ask our question, what else to be done? What can be done? I think also on the one side, the mass movement that was for months in the street, maybe it started, people get tired. It's 12 months. It's a lot of time. People boycotted, people went, closed train stations, roads, etc. They're not doing it as massively as they did it before because it's 12 months. So, and I think we didn't disrupt enough. So that's the other part. I think we did not disrupt enough. And that is connected with another thing. I mentioned in the beginning that we're fighting really, and we all know it, that we're fighting a really powerful system. And I talked about the cost. Apparently, we didn't manage to make the cost of supporting the genocide more than the profit from supporting the genocide. And this is where we need to work more.
I come back to power, Jason. I mean, we have in the United States and around Europe as well, parties on the far right that do not represent majorities. Take the evangelical right, Christian right in the US, represents about 12% of the population. And yet wielding power that we can only dream of. Why are they so much better at doing this? I mean, it's taken them the same 50 years, but now they're wielding a certain kind of power that we haven't figured out yet.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember reading an interesting analysis. I'm not sure I fully agree with it, but suggesting that the Republicans are kind of better Leninists than the left tends to be, because they understand something about organization. I mean, I'm actually not totally sure that's true, but I do think the grain of truth here is that the left is not very Leninist in the sense of, and I mean this in the very strict sense, right? Like, we don't have good organizations. That's what I mean by that, right? We have movements that address different issues, sometimes effectively, sometimes not. But we don't have the kind of political vehicle that could allow people who are aggrieved by different forms of injustice to plug in to a single struggle in a political vehicle that has the ability to take power and make real change, right? And I think, I don't know. I mean, I'm not a political scientist, and so I really can't answer this question very well. But my sense is that we're in this place now where it's clear that our existing strategies have not worked, and we need something new. And I think that the best that I can say here is, like, we need to learn from what was happening in the 20th century, right? Where, and specifically the anti-colonial movement of the 20th century, where people who were the most oppressed, right, most impoverished people on the planet succeeded in overcoming the most brutal and powerful imperial forces in human history, right? And they did this through very careful organizing and tactical struggle. And I think that's effectively what we need to be learning from. Not only that, but also the labor movement of the 20th century, the feminist movement of the 20th century, right? The gains that were achieved during that period, which led eventually also, by the way, to the new international economic order in 1973, 50 years ago, right? That is like we are the heirs of those revolutionaries, and they are the ancestors we must look to now for guidance. And so I believe with tactics like that and solidarities like that, we have a chance.
Jayati, would you weigh in on that? Same question?
Yeah, this is a tough question. I mean, Jason, you may have a point, but it's a very different world because the media is so all-pervasive everywhere. And it's, of course, it's the broad mainstream media and it's social media and everything. But Laura, you mentioned this important fact that when Netanyahu spoke, a large number of the delegates in the room left. I don't know how many even of my students, I'm in a progressive part of the US teaching at a progressive university. I don't even know how many of my students would even be aware of this. And it's this broader, well, I mean, of course, it's true that in the US people are particularly navel-gazing and so on, but I think there is a broader absence of sufficient communication, I think, of our points. I see this in India a lot myself. I think in India there is a real issue in terms of the absolute control of the media that doesn't really allow voices of different kinds to get even the arguments through, forget, catching the emotions. And I think a lot of the media here is focused really on relatively minor issues, very emotional rather than rational, and that we don't therefore get across that this is going to come back and get you. I mean, I go back to what Abir said. These are not things that stay where they are. They extend. Genocide doesn't just sort of end because you even exterminate a particular population in a particular place. This is a process that will come back to bite everyone. But I don't think that message has got through to sufficient numbers of people, at least in the few countries that I do know well.
Aderonke, want to add anything?
Thank you very much, Laura. I think, it looks like at the end of the day, it's the orchestration of the powers. They are done in a way to scare people off, to make it look like it's such a doomsday and there's nothing you can do that would be a win, but that is a lie. I'm saying it's a lie not because I like to be overly optimistic. It's a very, very gloomy time for all of us. But then where are we without our hope? Why are we organizing? And I'll tell a quick story. In the Nigerian situation, which has now cut across the rest of Africa, when we began the now water movement that we have, it's called our water our right movement. And what is that movement about? It's essentially to push back against water privatization. It started in Lagos, now it has spread across Africa. And is it because there had not been organizing in the past to push back or to resist corporate capture? No, that's not the reason. But we realized that no matter how much organizing was done, there was always, when you're dealing with corporates, we are dealing with people with interest and resources, huge resources, then it becomes a tough battle. What we did differently was to harmonize all the struggles. We realized something, that one of the ways that we were able to effectively push back against the military regime in the 90s was because the labor movement was working with civil society, and then the community was at the heart of everything. So it became less of isolated struggles and organizing, such that it would now matter what the labor movement is asking for. It would matter what civil society is saying. It would matter what the communities are saying, especially when you let them say it in their language, in their own words. So it's not about somebody bringing some big ideas from somewhere and trying to get community buy-in. No, it's actually the other way around, where you are using the language of the community, you are harvesting the organic knowledge that is dwelling within communities. So that's what happened in the Nigerian situation, such that the battles of many years that could not be won simply because people were doing amazing work, people were doing research, people were struggling, people were, but then they were not quite harmonized or synchronized. That was what we saw or we found out. And what we did with water movement, which is very recent, was to then harmonize all our struggles such that people power building was very important. And when we say people, also different categories of people began to matter in the struggle, such that you're talking about women power building, you're talking about youth and what are they bringing, what is the labor bringing, and so on. So being able to zero in on those strengths of different categories of people. We have activists. Look at what Shishani did today. That is activism. We have a lot of people doing art, doing music, doing, all of that is coming together in a way that they had never seen before. They had no choice but then to ask for people to come around to say, okay, so what is going on? I think that's one of the ways that oppressors become really terrified when they see people really coming together in meaningful ways. I understand what we are saying about the media and so on, but I think we then, what we do is to also spotlight the kind of media that is on the side of the people, that is doing the work in the way that is very responsible and that is useful, that we can, just get a buy-in of. So all of that worked. I wouldn't say that it has become total victory, because there's no way you can sleep with your eyes closed when imperialism is involved, or when corporatization is involved. Now we are talking extractivism. But with the water struggle, that became a win for us. I think that's one of the ways that we also partnered with TNI, because okay, you are bringing all the intellectual resources into the room. We are bringing our power to struggle, our strength to struggle, or just the agility that we have and the kind of respect that we have in the communities. So being able to harmonize our struggles, I keep saying it, and it's one of the things that has really polarized us. We sometimes speak different languages, but when we come down to it, we're actually fighting for something common, a common good. So I think the more we begin to bring all those voices into the room, when we realize that our struggles are very common, and then we begin to disseminate all of our findings, all of our knowledge that is sometimes really big or even too elitist, pardon my language, in a way that communities do not understand. When we're able to break down and to let people understand what is truly in it. Like Abir was saying, I think sometimes also the fact that people don't know what the true struggle is. It looks like, oh yes, we know the enemy, but then we don't know the interest. But when the people get simplified understanding of what the interests are, then it becomes easier to synergize and to harmonize our struggle. That has worked in some sense, and I'm really hopeful that we can put it to use in this situation as well, and gain some additional outcomes that are positive.
And Aderonke, thank you so much. You've perfectly pivoted. So I would like to, I mean, Aderonke has set a bar for stories that could lift some of our spirits and from which we could learn. Do other people have stories they want to share where they think there's a victory or progress made in a way that is teachable? Or to put it a different way, Jayati, for you perhaps, if you were Sam Rubin today, where would you put your $3 million a year?
Well, no, let me give you the story, because I don't know if it was money that did it. It wasn't the $1 million a year. Honduras, as you know, had a progressive president a while ago who was overthrown in one of the usual US-backed military coups. And then the military government in Honduras instituted the usual slew of neoliberal policies, possibly even worse, because these also included a bunch of special export processing zones that could be literally owned by global capitalists. A lot of the digital capitalists actually invested in some of these, and they would effectively form their own states. Okay, they were able to create their own citizens. You had to pay for citizenship, and they chose who could be a citizen. They created their own laws, etc., all within the territory of Honduras. It seemed like, this was one of those terrible right-wing coups that keep that country down for a very long time. And, the region has had its fair share of those over decades, especially when they're strongly supported by the US. But in fact, they were able 2 years ago through an election to bring back into power the party that had actually been overthrown last time. And a major plank of that party was, in fact, to get rid of those export processing zones, but it was to move to an entirely different economic paradigm, one that did not rely on external resources, one that did not rely on extraction, and one that ensured minimal social protection, decent living wages, etc., to the people. Now, obviously, you can, through progressive taxation and other things. Now, you can imagine the kind of pushback and the kinds of reactions you have got in in the US and elsewhere, specifically from big capital. But what is remarkable is that they have stayed the course so far. They've actually fought back. They have brought in a really excellent system of progressive taxation in which they are also saying that we will tax the multinationals who operate in our country according to our tax rates. They won't get away with paying lower tax rates because we are estimating their global profits and we're going to be taxing our share, which is an idea out there globally, but it's been more or less squashed by the OECD into this tiny, meaningless thing. They are saying that we deny the ability of any other players to claim that they can institute their own laws. Everybody in Honduras and the territory of Honduras is governed by Honduran law. And therefore, these export processing zones cannot carry on in the same way. Of course, there's been all kinds of pushback. And one of the ways of the pushback has been an attempt by the financiers who were part of one of these zones. And they are people like the usual suspects, Andreessen and Elon Musk and so on. Three of them, I think, have brought in a case against the Honduran government, an investor-state dispute settlement under a US-Honduras bilateral investment treaty. And they have demanded effectively 85% of the revenues of the government of Honduras as a payback, as a compensation for this massive profit-making potential to be taken away from them. Honduras is fighting this in the court. It's becoming a little bit more of an important cause across the region. But I think if this is the kind of thing, if it can become an important cause in the US as well, it really has the potential to shake a lot of the kinds of power structures that operate legally, that persist in forcing countries in the developing world to take the absolutely worst possible terms in terms of their own exploitation and extraction. So yeah, I think here's a good story.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else here have a story they want to share? Abir.
It's not a story, but I mean, we are like, I'm so invested in what's happening right now, and I think we should draw also an inspiration from it. I mean, the price is really high, and people, tens of thousands, it might be hundreds of thousands, lost their lives in the last 12 months. And this is a high price, but to be faithful to those people, I mean, we have to also draw an inspiration. These people paid with their lives so we can have a better world. So we can have a different world order. And we have to draw inspiration from the movement that was created all over the 12 months. It's a transnational, international, intersectional movement all over the world where people organized, really organized in so many ways. Students, the largest student movement, people archived, lawyers worked on lawsuits. There are countries like South Africa that joined and took the case to the ICJ. Lawyers went to the ICC. There is so many things happening, boycott movements, economic justice movements, so many things that happened in the last 12 years, and it is an inspirational, it is a story actually, it's a big story. People paid with their lives, it's a sad story, but at the same time, we laid an infrastructure for a global movement to make a change for a better world order. And I think this is the infrastructure that we need to build on. There were people who made like alternative media work, and that's important. Also, I mean, the work on media is very important. Alternative, people built alternative channels. I mean, all this, it's an infrastructure. It's a bits and pieces of so many different stories that are inspiring, how many people joined the struggle, the people who went to the streets, the people who organized demonstrations. It's not, things are not obvious. I mean, people are invested and they are committed and there are connections between different struggles. And that's a story for me. Thank you.
Jerome, anything you'd like to add?
Well, I mean, what can I add to that? I think that was really powerfully spoken, and it's extremely inspiring to me as well. So I teach at a university, or I used to teach at a university in London. We had students occupying a main hall. These are students who pay extreme amounts of tuition money. Yeah. And they often put themselves in very high debts. And frankly, many of them could, they could just zip it, and they could just get a really nice job and make a lot of money, and they could just, they could just become part of the system, but they didn't. And they actually, and we were talking about this earlier, it's interesting that it began at Columbia University. I mean, I think that is part of why the elite is so freaked out, because they know a whole new generation of kids are coming up who are getting degrees, who are getting educated, and they're going to climb the ladders and all the rungs, and eventually they're going to be, at some level, influential people in the future. And if you look at public opinion right now in the United States, which is ultimately the decider here, right? The country that funds Israel and provides it with the weapons to carry out genocide and occupation. The public opinion in the United States on a generational level is shifting in a really, really profound way. And I don't think that necessarily, the United States is a functional democracy, so that doesn't necessarily have to translate into policy outcomes. But there's going to be a whole generation of people 20, 30 years from now who are going to be absolutely fed up with what is happening. And they're not going to buy the myths, they're not going to buy the hypocrisies anymore. And I suppose that I draw sort of inspiration from that. I look at those students and I think, my God, like, I wish I was that, like that. When I was 20 years old, risking everything to stand up for a cause that doesn't even personally affect me, but that I feel so strongly about that I have to put my body and my education and everything on the line for that fight.
How many of us in this room had that experience as a young person? And how much did it affect your life, the whole rest of your life, right? I mean, speaking for myself, I look at these young people and I remember that this uprising is following by just a few years, millions of people in the streets around Black Lives Matter. millions of people in the streets fighting the carceral state. And to see now, when we say intersectional, it really is aligned. People are understanding the connections between policing, colonialism, genocide, incarceration, border rules, mass deportations. And it's just an irony that Donald Trump is promising to deport protesters. How perfect his solution to everything. That goes back to my question of where do we invest now? And we're going to get some respondents from people in the room. But I am curious. Internationalism, I'm hearing, needs reinvigorating, perhaps needs seeding with some new resources or some new attention. Jason, you'd send copies of Lenin?
Internationalism, yeah. Look, and first of all, I mean, there's really nothing that can be added to what you've said. It's 100% true, and there's nothing more inspiring than I think the resistance that we've seen here. I was going to say something about, we can look at what's happening in the Sahel. I think is very interesting. We can look at what's happening in Mexico. I think is fascinating. Also Brazil to a certain extent, et cetera. I think furthermore, like, efforts by some global South states to start trading outside of the imperial currencies, developing swap lines, developing their own special trade currencies, et cetera, like recognizing the importance of what Samir Amin, the Egyptian economist, called delinking from the core, right? To regain more sovereign control over productive capacity in the South, and I think that I think there's movements in that direction, which I have not seen in my lifetime. And I read about it in books from previous iterations of such movements, and now I'm seeing it in real life. And I think that this is just the beginning. And I think that the movement of resistance that you've pointed to is opening up space for this kind of conversation. The current order that we have is intolerable. It is intolerable, and we can no longer accept it. And everybody can see that fact. Something's breaking, right? And there's a moment here, I think, to build a new world.
Yes. Yes.
Beautiful. So I'm inclined at this moment to invite our respondents to respond, if that seems good. And we will come back for a final question for the panel. But let me start by introducing Tope. Tope Folarin is director of TNI's sister organization, the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, D.C. Tope, welcome. He's also a writer, author of the acclaimed 2019 novel, A Particular Kind of Black Man. So with a novelist's creative thinking as well as an organizational head, what's your thought of where we prioritize next, Tope? And do you want, there's possibly a mic.
1, 2, 1, 2.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Truly wonderful to be here. This conversation has been invigorating and excellent. I bring greetings from America, from the Institute for Policy Studies. TNI is our sister organization. We are so pleased and happy and excited about TNI celebrating 50 years this year. TNI, as evidenced by this conversation, plays an incredibly important role in vital conversations about the pathway forward. This conversation has been really, again, I think, really important. And I'm coming from a country where we're having an election, obviously, very soon. And the airwaves are filled with all kinds of nonsense and some positive stuff as well. And I remain intrigued by, and you guys talked about this a little bit, the continued rise of the far right, which is playing a major role in the US election. This is something I talk about with my colleagues in the States all the time, that we believe we have the arguments on our side. We believe that sort of evidence suggests that the arguments we've been making for a long time demonstrate that if we don't change, sort of horrible things will happen. But there's still this kind of rise of a far right that says, you know what, everything the progressives are saying, they're deeply problematic. Let's go back to the wonderful place of the mid-20th century when everything was okay, apparently, and life was better. And I think that part of the role that I think that IPS has to play and TNI has to play as well is, and I think Aderonke might have said this, is reaching out to people where they are. That continues to be a crucial part of this. I think about one of the major stories in the United States recently, this idea that there are Haitian immigrants going in Ohio, a state in the Midwest of the United States, that are eating pets, right? And this is a reason why immigration is intrinsically bad. Obviously, this is the kind of lie that's been told any number of times in the United States, right? This idea that there are these scary immigrants who are coming in, they don't share our values, they don't share our culture, and they're doing utterly horrible things. Now, what does the evidence actually demonstrate? That immigrants are vital to America's economy. Immigrants are vital to America's sort of cultural sort of power as well. And I think people recognize that. And what you often see is that people will say, oh, I like my immigrant neighbor, but like I don't like immigration in general. Part of this is, I think part of the response to it is continuing to make really potent cultural arguments that meet people where they are and show that these are your fellow human beings and that we all sort of suffer if we don't try to rise together to confront the challenges that we're facing. Thank you so much for this conversation. It's truly wonderful to be here.
Thank you. And we have a former staff member of TNI, Lydia Fernanda. Lydia? Yes, no, maybe? Is Lydia here? Yes. All right, coming to the fore. Expert on trade, investment, and corporate power. Policy advisor to the Trade Union Confederation of the Americas. Lydia.
Well, it's a bit scary to be here after listening to all of you, and it's also inspiring. I was thinking, how should I respond to all of these ideas? It's not easy. I got two questions when I was listening to you. One is about Latin America. Just at the end, I heard some mentions of Honduras, Mexico. And for a long time, we felt that well, we had done well, we got these pink tide progressive governments, then we lost them, then we are in a crisis. So where are we at now, and why is that not mentioned when we are talking about the stage of the world? No? So I was wondering why, and when I was listening about fascism in the US, maybe not with those words, I was thinking on some countries in Latin America that are facing that now. No, I'm thinking of Argentina, of El Salvador, and we don't hear about that. And even though the Honduras experience is inspiring, there is also under threat for a coup every day in Honduras. So that polarization and that right-wing moving on and keeping on people's minds is there also in Latin America. So it's not that we did it that well. We need to keep fighting. And we need to bring in the movements into movement. And that comes to my second question when I was listening to you. And it's about who are the actors here. So I heard some mentions of the corporations or some corporate names, but I feel we need to name them more. And we need to find it more specifically if we want to keep fighting for democracy. So those were my two main questions. Thank
Love
you.
it. I think today I saw Chevron called out in an international boycott campaign as the #1 supplier of military fuel for the Israeli military. Just a thought.
That's one.
Throwing out one name of one corporation. Anita Gurumurthy is a founding member and executive director of IT for Change, where she leads research and advocacy on data and AI governance. Anita, your response.
Thank you. When you sang, I thought about forgetting and remembering. And I think we live in times where technology has completely played its part in erasing social memory. So when you go down to the trade unions with whom we work as an organization, the young people who are precarious workers, gig workers as we call them, do not remember a past because they don't have access to that memory that there existed in that very city, in that very space, trade unions that have actually fought for them. The government workers in Bangalore do not necessarily support the gig workers in Bangalore. So that, that is really the project of technology today. It's primarily to keep our social memory as a claim that is not given to us. This is a situation, I think, as I heard everybody speaking, I felt that, Elon Musk was mentioned. It's not a situation where you need to speak truth to power anymore because the powerful know the truth. And more and more, when I read, just a couple of days ago, ILO came out with a publication which said, what we find now in hard-coded evidence is what we knew all along, that the share of labor to the total GDP is plummeting compared to the share of capital. So Goldman Sachs last month said, we don't really know that the benefits to humanity from artificial intelligence is going to outweigh the costs. Even then, we just simply go on. So why are we going on? Because I think the nature of the breakdown is, I think, most worrisome. There is a naturalization of precarity. There's a hollowing out of the public. And the ideas of sovereignty have been co-opted. And this is the technological colonial project. And I think that the material infrastructures of society and the normative structures of society have fused together thanks to digital technologies. And this is why what Jayati said in terms of extermination, brutality, and othering, I don't think the world has seen extraction in the form of data technologies and labor at a scale and in quite the deep way that we are seeing as we are now. And that's because the material infrastructures of that extraction have changed. And that's something that we really need to remember, even though capitalism is, as we know, a project that's continuous. Here I'd like to say that the rule-based systems are all aiding the 8 billionaires and not the 8 billion people. And here, all rule-based systems are subverted. Trade secrets are abused to lock away data because they're private contracts. But originally, the data belongs to the social commons. So that's the irony. No digital company pays its taxation. And no digital company is capable, I think, of following trade rules. And the ecological limits that everybody spoke about, I think we're really hitting the rock bottom with digital technologies. The energy consumption of data centers is something that's very, very worrisome because of the opportunity costs. Cities are not going to have water anymore. And my government is inviting big names like Microsoft to set up data centers when we really don't have water. So finally, what do? I think the example is really about local institutional autonomy, and those that have dared to stand up, whether it's the city of Barcelona or a small municipality in Latin America. We must remember that by 2025, 50% of European production is going to be thanks to Internet of Technology because of 5G connection. How much of Africa is connected by 5G? 3%. How much of Latin America is connected by 5G? 8%. So we are talking about living in inequality that we have never, ever seen before. So I really think that this is a very, very particular moment, and we have to recognize how the production technologies of today have fused together with media technologies, and what that really means for narrative capture. And there is a narrative war. And that, I think, has to be underscored. And finally, I'd really like to recall stories of different cities that have dared to do what they want to do. Brazil said, showed the middle finger to Elon Musk, sent him out. And I really think that those are where we really need to look. And I personally want to say that I recognize the power of youth. One of my daughters has joined the Student Federation of India. It's a left movement, and she left home at the age of 22 telling us that she's going to be perfectly safe, putting herself completely in mobilizing students in campuses in the city of Delhi, which I think targets most of the young people in India today. Thank you very much.
Anita, thank you. For our last round of questions, I would love to use my prerogative as moderator to invite Shishani to participate, if you'd be open. Not to say you won't perform again, but I would love your input in this last question. Where we're thinking, I often ask people at the end of my show, which you can find online, by the way, at lauraflanders.org. What's the story you think the future will tell of now? What do you think is the story the future will tell of now? So if the history of the last 50 years of TNI has been refusing to be narratively captured, if we were to look forward 50 years, what would the story be? Who wants to start? Jayati, you're smiling and you have so many books behind you.
Well, actually, that's another kind of narrative capture. This is a false Zoom background. It does have books I would read. It has John Pilger and stuff. So, yeah.
How apropos.
No, I don't know about the story. I'm really, first of all, I think Anita has brought up a really important other front that we didn't talk about enough. And it meshes in so much with all the multiple fronts that we have to contest. And it can seem overwhelming, right? I mean, I was listening to all of this and thinking, oh my God, yet another huge, monstrous, gargantuan kind of dragon that we have to deal with, which is insidious and works in very, very complex ways and which most of us don't know about. So I'm going to go back to a very pathetic kind of response, which is to say that despite all of these multiple cascading threats, and in a way it's related to what I think both Abir and Aderonke have been saying, that despite all of that, and despite the overwhelming power that we face and the very dispiriting nature of events all the time, things do change every now and then, and often in very unexpected ways. Sri Lanka had an election last week, and they have elected a former Maoist, a Marxist leader, whose the party has changed significantly since then. But they have elected someone who campaigned on a very anti-establishment plank. He's the first leader in Sri Lanka in more than half a century to not come from the traditional elite and the big families. And he comes from a party that has been openly saying that we have to reconsider that IMF, we have to reconsider our development trajectory, we have to reconsider the way we have organized our economy and our society. And it was an unexpected victory, and it was in the face of a massive combination of media and all other onslaughts that you can imagine. And of course, it's a country reeling under debt in which the people have gone through immense suffering. They did a peaceful Aragalaya people's movement that overthrew a corrupt Rajapaksa regime, only to get the same effective regime back, not with different people, that's all, and with greater oppression. But they have spoken again. Of course, it's not the answer. Of course, it's not the end of the story. Just like in Honduras, it's not the end of the story. But it shows that it can happen. And it shows that, in fact, if this happens in more and more places, there is a kind of momentum, there is a kind of domino effect of progressive change as well.
Domino theory of progressive change, I like it.
I'd love to react. I would love to react to this because, so much has been said, and it's really like I feel my emotions are running from left, as in hope and resistance, to like, oh my God, this world. And I'm just in between all of this, but what I've learned was, and this was during a theater production, it's called Sites of Memory, where we work with colonial buildings, and we try to give these horrible buildings a new meaning. And within this process, sometimes we do research in archives, but then you don't have all the material, you don't have the names of people, or people got different names. So what you do is a term called critical fabulation, which means that you fill in the blank spaces of that you didn't know. So you make up a name, you give somebody another name, not, let's say, the name of the slave owner. So when thinking of 50 years from now, hearing again like this huge disparity between, just the inequality that is going to happen because of this data and technology and AI, I'm also thinking, people are going to be so fed up, and we see that with the youth. It's really because they understand what is at stake, that they're putting their bodies into this struggle. And I really feel, like I feel it in my bones, that this feeling of we're so fed up, we are just not going to play part of the system. And the resistance, I mean, the level of violence and tragedy that I foresee is horrible, but I also feel that we're going to this source of our humanity because it was comfortable enough to be in the Western world. We're living a comfortable life. We could afford not to protest. We could afford to not do anything. But that is changing, and it will get even worse. So I feel that in those 50 years, those 8 billionaires will be 8 billionaires, but there will be 8 billion people that are like, hell no. We are completely fed up, and we will do whatever we need to do, because what else is there left to do? And I really feel strongly also to say that we stand on the shoulders of those that came before us. We stand on the shoulders of people that are losing their lives today, and to understand that we're not, I can feel hopeless thinking, what can I do? But we don't enter a space by ourselves. You come into the space with your whole lineage, with everybody that's part of your life, part of your ancestry, and part of the future you're building. And to understand that power, you know, the people power that we were talking about, that not losing hope, thinking back of what people survived, I think we should capitalize on that, as much as I hate that word, but still build on that.
Thank you, Shoshani. In the several indigenous traditions in the US, I hear it most often from my friend Judith LeBlanc at the Native Organizers Alliance. She says the present is when the past and the future meet. And that's what we have with us in the room, the past, the present, and us. Jerome, 50 years hence?
Well, I don't know if I can do 50 years hence, but what I find very interesting is this point that you just made, because I think that it was also true for the past.
Well, Shoshani made it, really.
Yeah, yeah, you did. But I think it was also true for the past. There were moments in the past when people thought, oh my God, like, you know, serfdom will never disappear. Enslavement will never disappear. You know, 150 years ago, workers and women did not have the right to vote. I mean, we're talking about things that happened throughout the course of history that seem unimaginable at the time, but that in hindsight become reinscribed into a story of history where we just go like, yeah, of course women have the right to vote, you know? I think that, you know, maybe 50 years hence, people will look back and say similar things. Like, of course we shouldn't burn fossil fuels. Of course we shouldn't allow genocides to happen. And I hope that that will be the case. But that will only be the case if we do the right thing, just as those people before us did the right thing. And that's where I really like what Jason said before, because I think that ancestors are important in this respect, because we are ancestors too, ancestors of the future. And so the choices that we make now will affect the life of people in the future, and that's the responsibility that we carry on our shoulders, and why we should, in this moment, rise up to do the right thing.
Jason?
Yeah, it's interesting to think about the way you described it, actually. And it kind of gives you hope, right? Like, you can imagine things could get significantly better 50 years from now. I mean, I'll be in my early 90s. It's going to be terrible for me, but hopefully a better world. But yeah, like in terms of the question of hope, I mean, like I struggle with this because almost every time I give some kind of public lecture, then somebody always wants to say, like, do you have hope for the future? And my response is always the same. Our hope can only ever be as strong as our struggle, right? If we don't build the struggle that is capable of achieving the future that we want to see, then there's no hope. Like, why just hope? I mean, hope does nothing. It has to be about building those movements, building that struggle, and then you win. So that's I think where we put our energy now. We build the world that we need in 50 years.
Aderonke?
Thank you so much, Laura, and thank you, everyone. I think if there's anything I know about that story, is the fact that it's going to have many chapters, numerous chapters. And I feel that it's going to also have different dimensions to it. There's going to be suspense, moments of joy, moments of tears, moments of, all of that. And that, I know that for sure because of these sort of conversations that we are having now. They're actually shaping what that story would be. We have seen an age-long systemic weaponization of things like poverty, like hunger, like patriarchy, and so on. And we see also now a systematic and systemic dismantling of those same weapons that have been institutionalized for so long. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And that when, we call it now the future. Today is the future they once spoke about at some point, and so on. So I know that story is going to be really full of different chapters. And today, this conversation is going to be one of those chapters. But one thing I would just say to us all is, especially for those who also would be going for COP29, I think, this year. That space, which is the UNFCCC space, is something I once described as just a jamboree of big boys in shiny suits and so on. It's very depressing. But at the same time, I want us to always take hold of the spaces that we are able to break in through. People have been very disenchanted with, and rightly so, with that space itself and everything that has come with it and what it has become and so on. Not like a lot of people even had faith in it in the first place. But now, one thing I will say is, something I observed at COP28, and that's for people who are in the environment activism and struggles. For someone who comes from Nigeria, where I have seen extractivism over the years, and the way that the corporations also share leading have been the devil or the demon that have been sent against the people, and they've been working also with the state and so on. I saw something that happened at COP28. Never before were we given a space to even address the entire assembly, and we did that. It was 2 minutes, which was ridiculous. But at the same time, one thing I keep saying is that when we have such spaces, let us take hold of that tokenism and use that same tokenism as a weapon to call out and to speak. It's unfortunate that even in such spaces, now names of countries are prohibited. You can't say Palestine, you can't hold the flag and so on. But what do? We don't move back and stop going because of those things. Instead, we find ways of still calling names, of still mentioning, of using colors and so on. So whatever we can do so that that story can be told. I like what Jason said. It's a function of whatever bricks we are laying now are those bricks that will set the foundation for whatever building is going to be built in the future. If that story is going to be told, everything we are doing now will be able to contribute to the chapters of those stories the way we want them told. So what I see is that in future, there's going to be a lot of stories, there's going to be a lot of chapters, maybe one same book, but at the same time, I know it's a long walk to freedom, like Mandela said, but is there going to be freedom? Yes, there will be freedom. We have seen it happen in history, and history, like they say, can always repeat itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Amir, I haven't forgotten you, but before we hear from Amir, I want to, while we're thinking about the future, apparently TNI has a time capsule outside, apparently, where you can send a message into the future of the world you want to see. So I don't know what form this time capsule takes, but it's out there somewhere. Your job is to find it. There's also a digital photo exhibition in the back there about seed savers, struggles of rural women in Southern Africa who are protecting food and seed sovereignty. There's a digital exhibition. And most importantly, or I don't know what most, but if you would like your background not to be virtual books, you can check out the TNI bookstall that is in the back there with many uncaptured narratives. So check that out. And finally, when we finish this conversation, which we will very soon, you can all continue the conversation in the bar until 11 p.m. and then downstairs. And again, I just want to thank everybody that came out today. But before we close, we'll end where we began. Abir.
That's a very huge responsibility to give it to me. So, back to the question, and I want to relate to what other colleagues said. It's been really inspiring to hear everyone's vision. But I think that what we do in the next, this is a very defining and critical moment in history. Whatever we do in the next few months and few years is going to define the world we're going to live in 50 years. If we are going to go to business as usual back after, hopefully we will end the genocide. And apartheid Israel and colonial Israel will feel again part of the world community. Everything is fine. Soldiers were criminals who were committing the most barbaric, ugly, that it was screened live on our, will be the tourists in the world, and they will feel welcomed. This is a critical moment. So everything we do today is going to define our future. In the next few months and few years, we can engage in, as I said, transnational, multinational, intersectional movement to use the infrastructure that was built today in these months and target the power. And yes, we name it. We name the country, we know the countries, we know the cooperations. There's so many, let's start with the arms industry. That's, I would say, let's name them, let's address them. They are the biggest problem in our world, and they control what's happening. So let's connect the struggles, let's build the movement, and let's define. It's either going to get worse if we let go, if we go back to business as usual, it's going to get worse. We are going to, what Israel unleashed in terms of war crimes, we're going to see it everywhere. And who's going to talk to the next genocidal maniac? Who's going to talk to them? If we allow this to happen today, it's going to happen to other people everywhere. So it is related to us. It is about what we do. So either we go this direction or we go into direction where in 50 years we are in a better, free world where Palestine is free and Palestine is hosting the world, call it social movement to celebrate our achievements in this world.
Yes.
And how we manage. Yeah.
Well, I thank you so much for ending there. What we do now matters, and I want to remind everybody that there is an Ignite Festival that's taking place all day tomorrow. I hear that it's mostly sold out, but a few people might be able to squeeze in, and you can get more information about it at the back. And while none of us have $3 million to put in every year, I do want to remind us that narratives have been shifted in this world through investment and focus, and in some cases, a lot of money. We weren't always the ones, people on the left, with a lot of money. It was usually the other side. But if you want to know how we ended up with the media monopoly that we have, it was intentional investment by folks with an ideological agenda to shift the narrative. If you believe in the work that TNI is doing, please invest what you can in this organization, which is unique, along with IPS, kind of unique. The two of them are unique. Is that my grandmother would say? Can you use unique that way? In investing in this kind of intelligence, in this kind of catalytic conversation, and in these kinds of stories that do both, help us live in the both that Shishani mentioned, both the direness of the needs that we face and the incredible potential that we have when we work together. So if you can support TNI tonight, please do. And thank you for everybody that made tonight possible. Do we have another song to take us out? Shall we just stay here and listen to you from here? Is that okay? Great. And thank you, our online guests.
Let's see what the time is. Okay, I was said 10 minutes, so I had 2 songs, if that's okay for you.
Sure.
Yeah, so much has been said, and it's really ringing in my head. And I'm very thankful to be here, not only as a musical intermezzo, because as an artist, I've played every possible protest, big and small, in this country and other countries. And it just strikes me how, ways of looking at the world and what knowledge is and where it lies and how we communicate it has often been in the academic realm. So it's so wonderful to be in a space where I feel that the role of the arts is also acknowledged within everything that we're saying. So I also want to invite everybody in that sense, who's watching or who's present, to please connect to artists, because there is so much intention, there is so much will to do the right thing and to spread awareness. And it's scattered, so that's also what I got from today. We need to bring it together and have one way of bundling, this effective approach. As they said, also when we boycott products from Israel, don't boycott everything because it's not going to work. Look at what they say that you should boycott and follow that line. So, but please engage with artists, because this is also a way to get the message in an understandable way to many people and to many different kinds of people. Now, in this journey of being part of these thousands of protests over the years with many people, it's also been this thing of seeing how we can become so tired. But that's also when you feel like, when you exhaust yourself because you're not taking good care of yourself, but also when you put all the responsibility on you. And I think it's also an important thing to learn this aspect of surrender, not surrendering to these horrible powers that be, but to surrender also to life in the moment and what you can do in this particular moment with the knowledge you have right now. So to also be soft with ourselves. This one is called Lost. I tell myself that it's okay to be lost in more than 1,000 ways. For the first time, I can feel it. I'm living in the moment. I let go of my expectations. 'Cause now I know that everything changes, and all I really have is a moment and a feeling I believe in. I believe things go the way they're supposed to. I try to think I can't control anything, and all that I can do is embrace what passes through. Open up, give yourself away. Things will fall in place somehow, someday. Open up, give yourself away. Things will fall in place somehow, someday. I've seen things come and seen them go. In the end, I guess it's about going through it all and taking something from it. Later you'll know why. Oh, I try to let go of my expectations, 'cause now I know that everything changes, and all that I can do is embrace what passes through. Open up, give yourself away. Things will fall in place somehow, someday. Open up, give yourself away. Things will fall in place somehow, someday. Oh, just open Someday, someday. Thank you. And as was said, the importance of including indigenous knowledge in this story is so important. 5% of the population is indigenous, and they protect 80% of biodiversity, and they are not in these spaces. So it's so important to see how can we bring that knowledge in a respectful way. And I'm going to show you something. So this, yes, it is a CD. We don't know what that is anymore, but I still have CDs. This is a project that I've done between 2016, 2018 with San communities in Southern Africa, and they are the oldest still living cultures, human cultures on Earth, hunter-gatherer communities, and like we know with Aboriginal communities, you know, all around the world, placed in reserves, and they cannot live the way that they have done for thousands of years, but they have such a beautifully rich culture, and they know so much of how to live in this harmony with nature, which we have lost. So with this album and research and kind of archiving, we've tried to document the stories, to get their knowledge and to transmit it through the arts and to tour together. So we toured through Europe. It was amazing to have them in this space and tell their own story in their own language, and have people hear them, and also create this awareness of engaging with another person, because we're comfortable engaging with people that look like us, but there's so many people that are really far away from how we move through life, and I think that's the biggest challenge. How do we engage with people furthest away, because there's so much to learn. And this experience of working with them within the Kalahari desert of Namibia, even though I come from there, it was the furthest away that I've ever been, because I grew up in cities. And it changed my perspective on the work that I do. For me, it's not about just, you know, liking a song. Of course, I want you to like a song, but it's what does the song do? What is the intention behind the song? And throughout, as long as humans have lived, we have sung together, we have moved together. It's such an important way of transporting this knowledge that I'm talking about. So I want to end this performance, this day, this amazing talk with our voices singing together. And we're going to sing a healing song. And this song is sung when we're in crisis, when there is war, when there are fights, when there is sickness, when we don't know how to get out of the situation. And in this song, we're calling upon the goddess Kaindo, and she lives on the moon. So we're going to call Kaindo to come down and give us support and knowledge in how to move further. So I'm going to sing it a few times, and then we're going to do the call and response. And for those that are interested in the music, I have CDs, booklets, all kinds of things. But most importantly, again, please engage with artists. We're doing a lot of this work in different fields. So the first sentence is, kind of way, yeah. And then you answer, oh, kind of way, yeah. Oh, kind of way, yeah. One more time, beautiful. Oh, kind of way, yeah. Kind of way, yeah, yeah. Oh, kind of way, yeah. Second sentence. Yeah, 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 yeah. And then your answer is, yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. One more time. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Kind of way, yeah, yeah. Oh, kind of way, yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Kind of way, yeah, yeah. Oh, kind of way, yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Kind of way, yeah, yeah. Oh, kind of way, yeah, yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, 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 yeah. Dapandula. Thank you.